I didn't throw the guy out immediately, mostly because I was too confused to react properly. He stood near the doorway, still holding the key, like he wasn't sure if he should stay or apologize. I stayed seated behind Dad's desk, watching him carefully. "You said possession next week," I repeated. "Yeah," he replied, casual. "Paperwork clears Monday." My chest tightened. What paperwork? That's when the conversation turned strange. He looked at me like I had missed something obvious. "The purchase agreement," he said. "For the property and operating assets." The words came out clean and confident, like he'd said them 100 times before. Purchase agreement, operating assets. I slowly leaned back in the chair. "This business isn't for sale." Now he looked confused. "Your partner didn't say that." Partner, that word landed harder than anything else. "My partner?" He nodded. "Your brother." The room went quiet. The office smelled faintly like dust and machine oil from the workshop downstairs. The wall clock ticked loudly enough to be annoying. I stared at him. "You're telling me my brother sold you this company?" "That's what the contract says." I stood up, walked around the desk, and for the first time since he walked in, I noticed the folder in his hand. He opened it without hesitation and turned it toward me. There was my brother's signature at the bottom of the first page. Neat, confident, final. It was the line directly above it, majority shareholder approval. Which meant one thing, somehow. My brother had found a way to sell our father's business without me. The building itself wasn't much to look at, a square concrete structure with faded paint and a metal loading door that groaned every time it opened. Most people driving past probably assumed it was just another small repair shop, but to us, it was 25 years of our father's life. He started the business alone in a rented garage. Fixed machines, tools, anything mechanical someone dragged through the door. Over time the shop grew into something steady. Not huge. Not flashy. Just reliable work that paid the bills. When he passed away 3 years ago, the business became the only thing he left behind. No big savings. No house worth fighting over, just the shop, and according to the paperwork. Ownership split between my brother and me, 50-50, at least, that's what I had always believed. My brother handled most of the official side of things. Permits, contracts, taxes. I handled the day-to-day operations. The repairs, the staff, the suppliers. It was an unspoken arrangement that made sense. He liked paperwork. I liked working with my hands, so while he dealt with documents and legal forms, I spent most days downstairs in the workshop, fixing things the way Dad taught us, which meant something uncomfortable had just occurred to me while staring at that buyer's folder. If there was a contract signed, if there was paperwork proving the sale, then my brother hadn't just betrayed me. He had been planning this long enough to make it look completely legitimate, and the worst part, I had no idea when it started, or how long he'd been keeping me in the dark. It wasn't like my brother and I had been close before Dad passed. But we had a rhythm, a silent understanding about the business and our responsibilities. Lately, though, something had shifted. I just hadn't noticed it until now. In the weeks leading up to the sale, he had started staying late at the office, claiming audits and inventory checks. Phone calls went unanswered for hours, sometimes days. I brushed it off at first. Maybe he was stressed, I told myself. I had work to do downstairs anyway, but that distance suddenly felt deliberate. Every time I tried to ask a question about suppliers or payroll, he'd brush me off with a vague, "I've got it handled." I remember one night. We were closing the shop together, and he stood by the counter staring at his phone, smiling at something. I asked him what was funny. He didn't answer. Just slipped his phone into his pocket and left without a word. That memory hit me like a hammer now, looking at the folder in the stranger's hands. All those little signs, his secretive calls, the late nights, the unexplained absences, they weren't coincidences. They weren't stress. They were planning. I felt my stomach tighten. My hands trembled slightly as I picked up a wrench from the desk, gripping it without thinking. I realized I didn't just feel betrayed. I felt blindsided, manipulated, like someone had been quietly erasing me from a story I thought I was a part of. And in that moment, I swore I wouldn't just stand by. I couldn't. Not when everything Dad had built, the place we grew up in, the business that defined us, was being taken out from under me. I had no idea what I would do next. But I knew one thing, my brother hadn't counted on me fighting back. I asked him directly the next morning. My brother. Not the buyer. Not a lawyer. Him. I called him, my voice tight but trying to sound normal, almost casual. Hey. Got a minute? I said. There was a pause on the other end that felt too long. Sure, he said finally. His tone was flat, like he was reading from a script. What's up? I tried to keep it calm. I ran into someone at the office last night. Said they have a purchase agreement for the shop. Care to explain? Silence. Then, almost reluctantly, he muttered, I sold it. He interrupted himself. I signed the papers. It's done. The words didn't even sound like him. They were clipped, careful, like he'd practiced them in a mirror. I couldn't process it. You. What? I asked. Without telling me. Without even discussing it. He sighed. I handled it. I thought it was the best way. The buyer offered a fair price, everything's above board. You don't even need to be involved. I felt my chest tighten. My hands went to my sides, fists clenching. Above board? You didn't even tell me there was a deal. You just erased me. I made the decisions, he said evenly. It's business. And there it was. The cold truth, laid bare, in his mind, it was business. Emotions, family, trust, irrelevant. I hung up, my fingers trembling. I stared at the wall of the office, at Dad's old framed photos, at the dusty certificates of achievement lining the shelves. All of it now meant something different. Everything I trusted, every shared moment with my brother, tainted. For the first time, I felt that raw, boiling combination of betrayal and rage that stories talk about but you never expect to feel firsthand. I wasn't going to let this stand. But even as the anger burned, a tiny, unsettling doubt crept in. Had I really known the full picture? It was the line directly above it, majority shareholder approval. Which meant one thing, somehow. My brother had found a way to sell our father's business without me. I couldn't just wait for him to explain. I needed proof, something solid, undeniable. So I went through everything myself. Filing cabinets, drawers, the safe Dad had left behind. Old contracts, invoices, tax forms. Everything. It was like walking through a museum of our father's life, except every document carried a new weight. I flipped through a stack of receipts and letters, each one a reminder of how much he had built with his own hands. And yet, amid all that history, I found the first real clue, an email from the buyer to my brother, dated weeks before the official signing. I froze. He had been negotiating behind my back for weeks. Weeks I spent thinking my brother was just busy. Weeks I spent trusting him. I followed the thread further. Bank statements, signed agreements, transfer authorizations. Every step lined up perfectly, legally airtight. There was no loophole. No technicality I could exploit. I felt my chest tighten. The reality hit me harder than I expected. He hadn't just done this impulsively. This was deliberate. He had prepared it meticulously, making sure the buyer, the contracts, even the banks wouldn't notice my absence in the process, and yet. Something still didn't add up. One line in the agreement caught my eye, almost buried in the fine print, a clause about liabilities and pending debts. Something I'd never signed off on, never even seen. And the numbers mentioned didn't make sense with what I remembered from our own accounting. A sudden thought struck me. Maybe the buyer wasn't the only one with secrets. Maybe there was more to the sale than I realized. I closed the folder slowly, trying to steady my breathing. The anger that had fueled me moments ago began to shift, just slightly. What I thought was a simple betrayal might be something far more complicated. I decided I needed to hear it from the buyer himself. Not emails, not contracts, real words, real reactions. So I called him. He picked up on the first ring, polite but distant. I just want to understand, I said. Did my brother mislead you? There was a pause. I could almost hear him weighing how much to reveal. No, he said finally. He was straightforward. Everything was explained. All the liabilities, the debts, the projections. Everything you're worried about, it was on the table. I felt a flicker of relief. Maybe he wasn't completely out to ruin us. Maybe this wasn't as catastrophic as I feared, but then he added something that didn't make sense. There's one thing. He said, voice careful. I didn't know when I made the deal that part of the debt issue was caused internally. But it doesn't change the price. The sale stands. Internally. I asked, heart skipping a beat. What do you mean? He hesitated. Someone within the company triggered a financial shortfall last quarter. It wasn't caught until after the deal was drafted. It complicated things, but your brother handled it. I tried to process the words. Internal. Shortfall. Complicated things. Handled it. The statement was vague, almost evasive, but it planted a seed in my mind. Maybe my brother hadn't just betrayed me out of greed. Maybe the sale had a purpose I didn't understand yet. Or maybe this was just another layer of deception. The problem was, I didn't know which one. And for the first time, the anger I had felt so clearly a few days ago started to feel muddled. A small, gnawing doubt settled into my chest. Maybe, just maybe, the person I was ready to destroy wasn't the villain I thought. After hanging up with the buyer, I felt a strange emptiness. Part of me wanted to storm the office, confront my brother, tear the deal apart right then and there. But another part hesitated. I kept replaying the buyer's words. Someone within the company triggered a financial shortfall. At first, I assumed he meant someone else entirely, another employee, maybe an accountant. But then, as I sifted through the paperwork again, something hit me. A series of transactions, small but consistent, lined up perfectly with my own recent decisions. Decisions I had made thinking I was protecting the company, ordering inventory, approving a loan, covering an unexpected equipment repair. Every number checked out. Every choice I had made had been logical. Yet, somehow, it had created a gap in the finances, one my brother had noticed and acted on. I felt my chest tighten and loosen at the same time. Betrayal and guilt twisting together into something nauseating. Could I have, unknowingly, set the wheels in motion that made the sale necessary? I wanted to call him, demand answers, scream. But another part of me wanted to hide, to retreat into the workshop, into the familiar hum of machinery and metal. Later that night, I stared at Dad's old ledger, tracing each entry with my finger. Every line told a story. Every misstep, mine alone, had consequences I hadn't accounted for. And suddenly, the neat narrative I had been building in my head, that my brother had acted out of greed, that he had intentionally betrayed me, started to fracture. I clenched my fists. I didn't know if I was angry anymore. Or scared. Or responsible, and that uncertainty, thick, heavy, impossible to ignore, was worse than any rage. I decided I had to confront him. Not angrily. Not with accusations. Just facts. I needed clarity. I walked into the office the next morning, the folder with all the contracts clutched in my hands, every step heavy with anticipation. He was already there, sipping coffee, leaning against the counter. His eyes flicked up, casual, almost too calm. "You're early," he said. I dropped the folder on the desk. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady but low. "About the sale. About the finances." He raised an eyebrow but didn't respond immediately. Then he gestured for me to sit. "Okay. Let's go through it." As we sat, I laid out the numbers, step by step. Every transaction. Every shortfall. Every decision I had made in the past few months. And then I watched him. Not defensively. Not smugly. But carefully. He sighed. "I should have told you sooner," he admitted. But I wasn't sure how to. When the shortfall appeared, the company was in real trouble. You weren't aware, because you were focusing on day-to-day operations, but it would have ruined the business if I hadn't acted quickly. I blinked. "So. The sale. You did it to protect the company?" He nodded. Yes. You had unknowingly created a gap in the finances. If we hadn't acted, the buyer would have walked. The business would have collapsed. I didn't want to risk it. I sat back, stunned. Everything I had built in my mind, his greed, his betrayal, his cunning, crumbled. Yet, a burning resentment remained. Not because he had protected the business, but because he had done it without me. For the first time, I realized revenge might have been misplaced, and yet, the urge to act, to make him feel the shock and hurt I felt, hadn't completely left. I was caught between gratitude and fury. And I didn't know which side was stronger. Despite knowing why he had acted, I couldn't stop myself. Rage and pride still simmered beneath the surface. The buyer had already invested time, energy, and trust into the deal. But I couldn't let it stand, at least, not without leaving my mark. I went back to the office late that night, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Everything was quiet. The building smelled of oil and dust, the faint tang of coffee from the morning still lingering. I opened the folder and started flipping through the contracts again, line by line, searching for anything I could exploit. It didn't take long. A clause about signatures, a small technicality, the majority shareholder approval section had been signed. Yes, but I realized I could challenge the buyer's claim because one critical document was missing, my consent, the one that technically made the sale incomplete. I paused for a moment, hand hovering over the phone. The temptation was intoxicating. Just a single call, a few words, and the deal could unravel. I imagined my brother's face when he found out. Relief, shock, maybe even a hint of fear, and then I did it. The call went through. I explained the missing approval to the buyer, emphasized the legal risk, and insisted the transaction couldn't proceed without resolving it. The buyer hesitated, then agreed. The deal froze. Contracts were put on hold. My brother would learn in the morning that his careful plan had been undone. I left the office feeling victorious. But the emptiness hit me almost immediately. The thrill of control, of exacting revenge, was gone. All that remained was a gnawing question in my chest: had I really protected Dad's legacy, or had I only proven that I could strike back? Even as I walked past the silent machines in the workshop, I couldn't answer. The next morning, my brother didn't explode. He didn't yell. He just stared at me, eyes narrowed, lips pressed thin. I expected anger. What I didn't expect was resignation. You did it, he said quietly. I shrugged, trying to look confident. Had to. You left me out. You sold everything behind my back. He shook his head. That wasn't the whole story. I froze. Something in his tone made me uneasy. He gestured for me to sit. The financial shortfall. It wasn't just bad luck. It wasn't just your recent decisions either. What do you mean? I asked. He took a deep breath. The debt, the reason I had to sell the company, was partly caused by actions you took last year. You approved that big repair contract. The one with the rushed suppliers. The one you thought was just fixing a backlog. That decision created a chain reaction. We were heading for insolvency without it. I felt my stomach twist. My own choices, the ones I thought were harmless, had triggered a crisis. And he had sold the company not out of greed, but to save it from collapsing entirely. You were protecting the business, I said, voice barely audible. Yes, he said. But I also had to make a call you couldn't make. Someone had to act. I didn't tell you because I thought you'd never forgive me for taking control. I sank back in the chair, stunned. All the anger I had felt, all the schemes I had plotted in secret, suddenly seemed hollow. The company was safe, but at what cost? Trust, respect, family bonds, they were frayed beyond repair. I looked at him and realized that revenge had nothing to do with justice. Intent and consequence, right and wrong, had tangled into a mess I wasn't sure I could sort out, and I couldn't tell if I had saved the business, or destroyed what little was left of us.